The night my sister walked into my photography studio with a lawyer's folder tucked under her arm. I was in the middle of editing a wedding shoot. 12 hours of work, 200 photos. A couple who had trusted me with the most important day of their lives. The studio smelled like coffee, and the faint chemical scent of the printer I'd bought secondhand 3 years ago when I was just starting out. It was mine. Every inch of it was mine. And for one very long second, standing in the doorway with that familiar half-smile she'd had since we were kids, my sister looked like she owned it. I want you to understand something before I tell you what happened that evening. I want you to understand what it took to get to that moment, not the dramatic part, not the folder, not what she said next, but the years before it. The quiet years. The years nobody saw. I grew up in Mississauga, Ontario, the older of 2 daughters. My sister is 3 years younger than me. When we were small, we were close. The way sisters sometimes are shared bedrooms, borrowed clothes. The kind of shorthand that doesn't need full sentences. My parents immigrated from the Philippines before I was born, and everything in our house was built around the idea of family first. You don't air your problems outside. You protect each other. You sacrifice. Those were the words we grew up with. Sacrifice. Family. Loyalty. The problem with those words is that in the wrong hands, they become weapons. I knew from the time I was 16 that I wanted to work in photography. My mother thought it was a hobby. My father thought it was impractical. My sister thought it was something she could borrow. She had a talent for that, borrowing things. My camera when we were teenagers. My friends. My mother's attention whenever I had something worth celebrating. I used to tell myself it wasn't intentional. That she just had a big personality, and I was quieter, and that's how these things go. I told myself that for a very long time. I moved out at 22 to a basement apartment in Brampton. I worked at a portrait studio during the day, and shot weddings on weekends for whatever I could get. I saved everything. I ate a lot of rice and frozen vegetables, and I did not complain, because I could see where I was going, even when nobody else could. By the time I was 26, I had enough to put a deposit on a small commercial space in downtown Mississauga. Nothing fancy. But mine. A studio with good north-facing windows and enough room for a seamless backdrop and a client consultation area with 2 chairs and a small table I found at a garage sale in Oakville and sanded myself. I told my family. My mother cried. My father said he was proud. My sister hugged me and said she always knew I'd make it. 3 months later, I found out she had taken out a loan using my name. I found out the way you find out things you weren't supposed to find out by accident. A letter addressed to me at my parents' house. A collections notice from a financial services company I'd never heard of. $14,000. The account had been opened 18 months earlier. The signature was mine, except it wasn't. I had been in Calgary at a conference when the application was submitted. I have the hotel receipt. I have the conference badge. I have the time-stamped photos I took at the venue because I was documenting the whole trip. None of that mattered to my family when I brought the letter to the table. My sister cried. She said she had been desperate. She said a friend had convinced her to invest in something that went sideways, and she'd panicked, and she knew it was wrong, but she was going to pay it back. She promised. She had a plan. My mother held her hand. My father looked at me and said, quietly, that we handle things inside the family, that going to the police would destroy us, that I should understand. I looked at my sister across the kitchen table where we had eaten 1,000 meals together, and I understood something I hadn't understood before. I understood that for my entire life, the sacrifice they'd been talking about had always been mine to make. I paid the debt. All $14,000 over 14 months, while running a business I'd built from nothing, while pretending at Christmas and Thanksgiving that everything was fine. I did it because I was not ready to blow up my family. I did it because I still believed that maybe this was the worst of it, that it would be the last time. I stopped being invited to things gradually. It's hard to explain how that happens. It's not one conversation. It's 100 small exclusions. A dinner I found out about on Instagram. A family birthday I wasn't called for. My cousin's graduation party where apparently there wasn't enough room. I kept showing up to the big things, the obligatory things, and each time I was there, I could feel it the way my sister sat closer to my mother, the way my father changed the subject when I walked in, the way my presence had become something to manage rather than welcome. 2 years after I paid the debt, I stopped showing up. I stopped calling. I sent a card at Christmas and I kept my phone charged and I waited to see if anyone would notice. Nobody called for 11 months. I want to tell you what those 11 months were like, because I think people assume silence from your family means quiet suffering. For me, it was the opposite. It was the first time in my adult life that I had a weekend entirely to myself without guilt. The first time I booked a solo trip to Tofino, on the West Coast, 3 days of walking on the beach with a camera and nobody needing anything from me, and I didn't have to explain it to anyone. I started sleeping better. I started eating actual meals. I started saying yes to opportunities I had previously talked myself out of because they felt selfish. I hired a second shooter, then a part-time editor. The studio started getting referrals from wedding planners in the GTA. I raised my rates, and the inquiries didn't slow down. I got a feature in a regional bridal publication. I was booked 14 months out. I was in the middle of a shoot, a maternity session, a couple from Etobicoke who had driven 40 minutes, because someone had recommended me specifically when my phone buzzed with a message from a number I didn't recognize. The message said, "It's me. We need to talk. It's about the studio." I finished the shoot. I edited the preview. I went home and I sat with that message for 2 days before I replied with a single word. When? My sister came on a Tuesday. She brought my mother, which I had not agreed to, and she brought a folder, which I had not expected. She came at 6 in the evening when I was alone in the studio. I had a client consultation booked at 7, so I knew exactly how much time I was willing to give them. My mother looked older. She looked tired in the way people look when they've been worrying about something they won't name out loud. She hugged me at the door, and I let her, because she is my mother, and whatever complicated thing exists between us, she is still my mother. My sister stood behind her and looked around the studio with an expression. I recognized the same expression she'd had when we were teenagers, and I got something she wanted. I offered them water. I sat down. I waited. My sister opened the folder. Inside was a document I'd never seen before. She said she'd had a bad year. She said the debt. A different debt this time. A business loan she'd taken out in her own name to open a nail salon that had closed after 7 months was now being pursued by private creditors. She said one of those creditors had, through some process she described vaguely, come across information suggesting I had been a co-signer on a related account. She said they were prepared to pursue me for 40% of the outstanding balance, $22,000. She said if I agreed to sign over 12% of the studio's annual net revenue for 3 years, she could have them back off. She said she had already spoken to someone, a friend who knew about these things, who said this was the cleanest solution. I looked at my mother while my sister was talking. My mother was looking at the table. I asked my sister if I could see the document. She slid it across. I read it carefully. I am not a lawyer, but I have had contracts reviewed by one since the first year I was in business. The document was not nothing. There was a real creditor. There was a real debt, but the cosigner claim was not what she had described. It was a thin argument. The kind of thing that might frighten someone who didn't know their rights. The kind of thing that works when the target assumes the worst and panics. I looked at my sister, and I thought about the $14,000. I thought about the 11 months of silence. I thought about Tofino and sleeping through a full night, and the maternity couple from Etobicoke, who had driven 40 minutes because they trusted me. I told her I needed 24 hours. She said she needed an answer tonight. I told her that wasn't how I operated, and that she was welcome to wait in the studio until my 7 o'clock client arrived, or she could leave. I said it the same way I talk to vendors who push back on contract terms level, uninterested in the drama, completely prepared for either outcome. My mother started to say something. My sister put her hand on my mother's arm. They left. What my sister did not know, what neither of them knew, was that 6 weeks earlier I had received a phone call from a collections agency. A different one. They were trying to reach a previous client of mine who had listed me as a reference, and during the call, almost as an aside, the agent mentioned that there was a small business debt file connected to an account in my name that had been sold to a third-party purchaser. He mentioned the original creditor's name. I recognized it immediately. It was the same financial services company from the letter 7 years ago, the $14,000 I had paid in full. Except apparently the original account had been bundled with other delinquent files before my final payment cleared and sold to a purchaser, and the purchaser had not received the payoff documentation. The debt, my debt, that I had paid, that I had records for, had been sitting in a file somewhere, technically unresolved on paper. I called my lawyer the next morning. She made 3 phone calls. By the end of the week, we had written confirmation from the original creditor that the account had been satisfied in full. We had it registered. We had the purchaser's file formally closed. My lawyer sent me the documents by email, and I printed them and put them in a folder in my filing cabinet. I want to be clear about the timeline because it matters. I had closed that file 3 weeks before my sister walked through my door. The next morning, I called my lawyer again. I told her what had happened the previous evening. I described the document my sister had shown me. My lawyer listened, and then she said 2 things. The first was that the cosigner claim was almost certainly unenforceable given the documentation I had. The second was that what my sister had done, presenting a document and suggesting I sign over revenue or face creditor action, had a specific legal name. She said I should think carefully about whether I wanted to pursue it. I thought about it for the rest of that day. I called my sister that evening. I asked her to come back to the studio the following afternoon. I told her I had made a decision. She came alone this time. I had set 2 folders on the consultation table. Mine and hers. I let her sit down. I let her start to say something about how she hoped I had thought about this reasonably, about how this was the simplest solution for everyone, about how she didn't want things to be difficult between us. Then I opened my folder. I showed her the payoff confirmation from the original creditor. I showed her the registered closure document. I showed her the letter from the third-party purchaser formally releasing any claim. I showed her my lawyer's written summary of the cosigner argument and why it had no realistic standing. I watched her face as she read. Then I put a second document in front of her. My lawyer had drafted it. It was a formal notice that I had engaged counsel in connection with the events of the previous evening, that I was retaining all documentation, and that any further contact regarding financial demands on my business would be treated as a continuation of the same matter. It did not use the word extortion. It didn't need to. My lawyer said sometimes the absence of the word is louder. I told my sister that I was not going to sign anything. I told her that I wished her well with the creditors, and that I hoped she found a real solution, and that I meant that genuinely. I told her that if she needed to speak with me in the future, she could do it through my lawyer. She asked if I was serious. I told her I had never been more serious about anything in my life. She left without the folder. I don't know if she forgot it or if she wanted me to have it. I locked up the studio, turned off the consultation lights, and went into the back where I had a shoot to prep for the next morning. A family from Burlington, 3 kids under 6. The kind of session that requires every backdrop and every trick I know to get a single frame where everyone is looking in the same direction. I made a tea. I sat in my good chair by the north-facing windows. Outside, downtown Mississauga was doing what it does in October gray sky, the last leaves on the trees, people moving fast on the sidewalk with their collars up. I thought about the word my mother used when we were growing up, sacrifice. I thought about what it had actually cost me. Not in dollars though, I know that number exactly, but in the years of apologizing for taking up space, the dinners I sat through performing a version of myself that made everyone comfortable, the opportunities I hesitated on because I had been trained since childhood to shrink. The 11 months of silence I had been the one to break, gently, with a Christmas card, as if what had happened was a misunderstanding rather than a pattern. I did not feel angry sitting there. I want to be clear about that. I felt something quieter and more permanent than anger. I felt like I had finally put something down that I had been carrying for a very long time, without realizing how heavy it was. I sent my mother a text that night. I told her I loved her. I told her I was not going to be available for a while and that I hoped she understood. I told her that when and if she wanted to have a real conversation, not about money, not about my sister, just the two of us, I would be there for that. She replied with a single heart emoji. It's been 4 months since that evening. My mother and I have had 2 phone calls. They were not easy, but they were honest in a way our conversations hadn't been in years. My sister has not contacted me. My lawyer's office received 1 inquiry from a number we didn't recognize. They responded with the reference number for our file and heard nothing further. The studio is fully booked through next spring. I have started teaching a monthly workshop for emerging photographers, mostly women in their 20s, a lot of them immigrants or children of immigrants, a lot of them navigating the same thing I navigated, the guilt of wanting something for themselves. I don't talk about my family in the workshops, but sometimes, when someone says they're not sure they deserve to charge what they're worth, I look at them and I think about that consultation table and the 2 folders and the face my sister made when she understood that I had been prepared long before she arrived. I tell them, know your documents. Know exactly what you've already paid for. And never, ever let someone convince you that the debt is still yours when you have the receipts to prove otherwise.